This story is from Reddit user ChristianIsLost72, the White Witch. In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men, and I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures many would never get to experience, and I am thankful for every experience that life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move us into a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side a fairly large cemetery. Our particular house was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick Indiana Jones-style jungle. Jungle the neighborhood kids and I would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only American family living in that cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families, and it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite us was an older couple with a lush garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else actually. We lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery, and that cemetery was unlike any cemetery I had ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above-ground crypts are built, many of them built into the sides of the hills that make up the island. The crypts are large, made of huge arcs of polished stone set over a large square of that stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside, the square is inset with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of shelf on the outside so offerings could be made to lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley that swooped back up into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts, and spiderwebbing up and down through the crypts were various stone step pathways that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come visit with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me as the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back of her garden and sat me on a thick wooden bench that was carved with scenes of fishermen and men with swords, and told me she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes and soon returned with a tray that held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said she had seen me, my brother, and some other kids daring each other to follow a stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down to the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken or cracking, in and out of bushes and at a steep incline. It would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we could take walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be devils, monsters that would murder innocent citizens for no reason other than to kill. That fear was the product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men to military service and farmers to fight alongside them. But many didn't. Many ran, and with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off of a cliffside rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified at hearing this. I had no idea this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness I started to cry. The sun was setting and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry. This was in the past, and the past is something we must always remember, so we never go back. She went on with her story. One young woman had followed through with this sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her loss unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of suicide doomed her to purgatory. She would remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared, the cemetery drowned in inky blackness, the main path dotted with dim broken lights feebly illuminating small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders the cemetery, she said, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first, a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side, like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up here. We were too far. But that is why we shouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama-san said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery. Not once. And I never sat back there with Mama-san again either. That was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park now out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. I'd like to go back, to see if she's still there, wandering the graves, looking for her children. This story is from Reddit user No Preparation, 1870. Appalachian Horror. I figure the best way to start this is by stating that this is a series of events that I have experienced throughout my 27 years of life, living in the Appalachian region of rural Southwest Virginia. Some have just been feelings, while others have left me unable to be outside after dark, which, as many of you may know, is something that you never do when you live as deep in the mountains as I do. First, I will go back as far as I can remember to when we had just started living in the house that we still currently live in. In the grand scheme of things, our house really isn't all that old. If I remember, it was built somewhere around the 60s to 70s, so really not that old. When my grandparents bought the house and we moved in, was when the experiences started happening. They weren't bad experiences, don't get me wrong. Mainly things being moved, shadows out of the corner of the eye, strange smells and sounds. But nothing I would call bad, just strange. My mother and father had moved a trailer onto my grandparents' property at that time as well, and my mother, unlike my granny and myself, is very much a skeptic. I vaguely remember her always brushing off Granny telling her about the strange smells and other things happening around the house. Until one day she was by herself at the trailer. My brother and I were at school. Granny was at work and my papa was most likely in his recliner at the house. Something to know about where the trailer sat at the time and the land we own. We own a few acres of land with a creek running about halfway through it, splitting the land that we lived and worked on from the land that was almost entirely mountainside. The trailer was sat at the very edge of the property by the creek. There was about half an acre of land between the house and the trailer, and my mother, who was home alone, started smelling a man's aftershave. Could potentially mark that up to my father, except my father didn't wear anything like that when he was alive. Not that he didn't like it, that stuff just never smelled good on him. Granny always said that smell goods always rotted on your daddy, even as a baby. So it wasn't my father. My papa was in the house at the other end of the property, and she just couldn't figure out where this clove-like smell was coming from. Things went on like that for a long time. Objects being moved, the smell of a man's aftershave, all of it. Finally, and I don't know what prompted it, my grandparents decided to get the house wiring checked out. Turns out that the house had been wired with the same kind of wires that were used in coal mines, and a lot, if not most, of the wires were bad. Strangely, once the wiring was fixed, all the strange happenings in the house and property stopped. Granny still says to this day that the previous owner was looking out for us. Now, we're going to skip forward a few years. By this time, my mother has divorced my father, given up custody of me and my brother to our grandparents. I'm still at the age where playing outside in the dirt and creek is the most fun a southern child can have, and I have made myself a little place across the creek in a little thicket to play in. It was a good, quiet place for a child to play, and was good for a while. There's always a feeling that comes with being watched. Different feelings to being watched, and this feeling I got, even as a child, was not a welcoming nor friendly sort of watching. I never found out what it was, nor have I gone back to that little spot I used to play in. Even approaching the area I used to play in gives me such a sense of dread and apprehension that I have never been able to shake. A few years later, and my younger brother and I are living with my mother and her new husband. A mistake now that I look back on it, but that's not a post for here. I wanted to decorate my new room, so we went to the local flea market, where I bought a clock and a painting to hang up in my room. Now, before these items entered the house, it was just a normal house. Afterwards, doors opening on their own, items being moved, my cat refusing to leave my side, my things gone missing only to show up in other rooms, sleep paralysis, a tall, dark shadow moving in the corner of my eye, voices. It was awful, and a time in my life I never want to revisit. I distinctly remember laying in bed with the cat. My light was on. I had my CD player blaring music, the usual teen things when, out of nowhere, it felt like something kicked the edge of my bed. I'm not talking a light kick like someone trying to get my attention. I'm talking hard enough to scoot my bed several inches to the side. There were nights where I'd be laying in bed, my door cracked because of course I had the room with no windows, and I have always had a slight fear of pitch black. I'd be laying there on my side so my face was facing the door. Now, something to know about me is that I have awful vision. Without my glasses, I can only see clearly a few inches in front of my face. This doesn't mean, however, that I can't see movement. I believe that it's far more terrifying to only be able to see a dark blur moving towards you than to clearly see what that blur is. We didn't stay long in that house and was forced to move not long after. And during the move, I was forced to leave the clock behind, and, oddly enough, the strange happenings stopped. Now, we skip a bit more forward in time. I'm an adult now, and have had more experiences now that I'm back in my hometown, in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. Everything from hearing a woman outside in the middle of the night in January calling hello, over and over to being outside at night smoking and getting the overwhelming feeling that if I didn't get inside immediately that something would attack me, to the crickets outside going quiet and the fear of turning around to look out the window for fear of what may be looking in. But that's all for my experiences. Long-winded, I'm sure, and there are some things I have left out, as I am at work, and don't have time to write more than I have. But I hope some of you have enjoyed my retelling of my life experiences. This story is from Reddit user Bappo the Mighty. We got lost in a forest, and it was one of the strangest experiences of my life. The following is a story that took place quite a few years back now. However, it still baffles me completely, and I'd like to share it here. I'm a teenager and I've been in scouting Boy Scouts for nearly all my life, and I really enjoy exploring with my friends and being trusted more, as I'm older now. A few years ago, me and two girls named Amy and Harriet were asked to head into the woods surrounding our campsite to find a long, straight stick, suitable for carving into a point. Bear in mind that I was a lot younger back then. Harriet was older, and Amy was only 1 year older than me. We had been walking in deliberately the same direction to not get lost, and memorizing the surroundings as we went, to find our way back easily. About 15 minutes in, we couldn't find anything to take back, so we turned around to return to the campsite. That's the initial panic set. The trees had almost unnaturally knitted themselves together in such a way that it seemed our path was non-existent in the first place, like it had just vanished. We looked around 360 degrees, and now everything looked the same. Trees we could have sworn were different from one another and appeared as all copies of the same tree. We kept walking in what we thought to be the correct direction, whilst shouting out for help, and eventually came to a concrete path, almost like a road but very thin, separating the forest, splitting it into two. We didn't follow the road as it went in the wrong direction to our campsite. On the other side of the path was more forest. However, nearby was an abandoned shack, likely used for storage or whatever else. We had no idea anything like this was out here in these woods, so we just kept walking. We eventually came to a road we didn't recognize. A woman wearing a pink and purple regatta outdoors coat walked past, and we frantically asked her for the direction of our campsite, as by now, according to our watches and Harriet's phone, we'd been walking for an hour and a half. She said she'd never seen us before, but she said there's another campsite in that direction. We followed her advice and eventually came back to our campsite. We frantically apologized for being so long and that we couldn't find anything. The leader, Ian, could see all three of us were shaken up, and he stated confused that we'd only been gone 25 minutes and that our free time was still going on. To this day, this baffles all three of us, as our free time was 40 minutes long and our watches and phones had said we'd been gone for hours. The forest we were lost in felt crushing and claustrophobic, like we entered an area where the concept of time didn't apply. I believe in the paranormal, however, this was so unlike anything I've heard or experienced before. It was like we'd been in a time vortex or something, and that hours in the forest were only minutes in the rest of the world. The feeling was very strange, and it stuck with me for the rest of the camp. This story is from an unknown Reddit user, Traumatizing Night Shift. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually, none of the port workers would stay overnight, except for the safety official. I wouldn't be on the shift alone since the site has a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, usually, there would be 3 guards, including me. Since the area was fairly big, there were different posts, but the front gate was the main entrance area, where all of the guards would be stationed overnight, since there was no need to put them in other posts, because there was no activity in the site at this time. The veteran guards that have been there for years would often say that the site was haunted, given the fact that there have been accidents and deaths that occurred in the area a long time ago. I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm a religious person, but I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds, but nothing too crazy. Just to describe the setting to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions when big projects were being constructed at the port, the workers would sometimes stay overnight, because there were times when port workers were required to stay at the port for a few days. There was a gym on the site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym there's a sauna, weights, and even a racquetball court. If you don't know what a racquetball court is, it's similar to an indoor tennis court with thin plastered walls and thick glass doors. Usually on our patrol rounds, one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning to the front gate. On one of those nights, I and Mike decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. This is around 2:30 a.m., and the entire building is so quiet that you can hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is off, And so is everything else. The only thing that's running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then, after a few more minutes, we heard the loud thump once more. At first, we thought it was our lieutenant, which could have been walking around. But then we radioed him, and he gave us his location, which was front gate. We tried thinking logically about what could be making those thumps on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought it was the air conditioner, but then we remembered that it was off. And even when it switched on during the day, there are no reports of thumps coming from the air conditioner. After a few more minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me to this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym, where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlight and aimed it towards the clear glass door. I got chills all over my body, and I started tearing so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means the loud thumps were the balls mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if something was playing inside the cage. We were both so confused and frightened about how this was happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless, and we started yelling and running away because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked why we were tearing and running ridiculously. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why there are always guards, that quite often there's something evil in the area. And it's not the first time that something that bad has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows passing through the office areas and lights mysteriously switching on and off. To this day, I still get chills recounting my experience with my friends and family. And I'm even getting chills right now as I'm typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that. This story is from Reddit user Mars1317 home alone with my old dog. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine, play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout dinner, pizza or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then, around 2 a.m., fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who has lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap, and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed home down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never seen him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of German Shepherd K9 unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom-used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open, even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then, I head down my basement. I probably should have ran, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus, I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "Oh fuck," and the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting in my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was going to give. A few years back, we had to have him put down because he just had no will to live anymore. Before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil.